Last preseason episode here in season two of Hoist the Colors. I'm Tim Best. He's Pat Madden. We're only 3 weeks away from the season officially tipping off, and you can tell the season's almost here when the preseason AP poll drops. Seton Hall didn't get any votes, which I don't think either of us were really surprised, or anyone really that follows Big East hoops in the Seton Hall fan base either. Like, we weren't surprised one bit that Seton Hall didn't get any votes. But it was really interesting to see that the conference, and this last episode before the preseason, we talked about the grand scope of Seton Hall's team and looking in the non-conference particularly, and like kind of hinting at some of the games on the schedule, specifically with Big East play. We only hinted at that, but we want to take this time to go into the depth of looking at how Seton Hall is going to look in the entire scope of the conference. So, three teams ranked in the top 25. UConn, the two-time defending champs, check in at number 3. No surprise that they're ranked in the top 5. Creighton checks in at number 15. They're returning Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner, who has won the Big East Defensive Player of the Year, I think 3 times in a row, I believe. And then Marquette checks in at 18. 3 other teams receiving votes. St. John's just missing out at 27. I think Xavier was top 30, and then Providence getting some consideration, as well as Bryce Hopkins, after who got injured against Seton Hall when season-ending knee injury. He's expected to be back come opening night. But Pat, you and I, we both follow the conference pretty closely. What's your overall thoughts on where Seton Hall is going to stack up against the rest of the league, and essentially what they're going to need to do to get themselves back in the conversation to get into the NCAA tournament spot? They were one of those 68 spots they were robbed of last year.
Well, you didn't mention two things which came out within the last week
Right.
that have a measurement, have at least an analytical measurement of the conference as a whole. One was last Tuesday when Evan Miyakawa, otherwise known as Evan Maya, put out his preseason ratings. Let me see if I can I'll bring them up while I mention the other one, by the way. The other one, of course, is the everyone knows him. Not many people love him. Good old Ken Pomeroy and KenPom.com, which has Seton Hall, which he came out last night, and he has Seton Hall as the 10th best team in the Big East. Now, a lot of these rankings are using numbers from last season, so that you have to take what you've got. You have to take what you've got with sort of a grain of salt in terms of, yeah, Evan Maya, by the way, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They have us as the 8th ranked team. Evan Maya has us as the 8th ranked team analytically.
That's
Ken
fair.
Pom has us as the 10th best team analytically. So I think that in terms of what's on paper, I think the 6 teams that got votes are probably more, at least Providence and St. John's are marginally better than Seton Hall. I think Xavier's a little bit more of a wild card than people have him out to be. Everyone loves Xavier because they got some players out of the portal everyone loves, and everyone's expecting Zach Fremantle and Jerome Hunter to be as good as they were 2 years ago. I think that's an open question. I think on Providence's side, Bryce Hopkins being as good as he was before he got injured last year is an open question. He's coming off an ACL. Now, he's not really the fastest player. So recovering from an ACL is not going to hurt his game as much as it might hurt a guy who depends on his quickness. On the other hand, we saw with Justin Moore of Villanova the last 2 years, coming off a serious injury. You never know if a player is going to be 100% what he was before he suffers a serious injury. So guys like Hopkins, Fremantle, and Hunter, you have to look at what they're doing, let's say in some of these non-conference games heading into December, before you can get a firm grasp as to how Xavier's going to look and how Providence is going to look. St. John's, of course, has so many transfers coming in. They have a whole new starting backcourt with Kadari Richmond and Devion Smith. They haven't played together except in practice, and I guess they're going to play a couple of exhibition games over the next week and a half. So, they're going to have to figure out a way how we see how they gel together and to sort of get an idea about how St. John's is going to play. I think Butler is a team that it's like they were last year. They're hiding under the radar, but they bring back two, arguably their two best players from last year's team in Pierre Brooks and Jalen Telford. So although I don't know if I can tell you definitively whether that makes Butler as good or better than they were last season. I think Butler's a team that a lot of people might end up sleeping on. And Butler's a team, Butler surprised everybody with how well they played in the non-conference. And Butler was competitive in a lot of Big East games until sort of the end of the season. They fell off a little bit. So the middle, sort of like the middle to bottom end, I think Connecticut and Creighton are clearly, I think if you had to put them in a tier, their tier is higher than everybody else.
Yeah.
But then the question is when you get from, let's say, 3 to 9 in this conference, how do those 7 teams sort of shake their way out? You can make an argument that Marquette's got a little bit above the other schools because they're bringing back 3 starters from last year's team: Cam Jones, Stevie Mitchell, and David Joplin. So we know what we're getting from Marquette, and we know that what they were, even without Tyler Kolek, was a top 20. I think they're a top 25 team, to be perfectly honest. So I think Marquette's going to be tough. So I think if you want to look in big picture right now, where Seton Hall fits in everything, they're definitely not a top level team, and I don't think they're on the level with Georgetown, DePaul, but where they fit into that middle ground. And I think that's what we're going to have to look at, not only in the non-conference, but as we start to see some conference games being played right before and right after Christmas.
Yeah, when I saw Ken Palm had us as the second worst team in the conference, only ahead of DePaul, I'm like, nah. That's not right. Evan Maya, on the other hand, like 8, like, okay, like that's actually right in the middle of the range I would have had. I had him somewhere between 7 and 9. I remember last year, a lot of people, like they had, I think in the preseason coaches poll, like that was released on Big East Media Day last year, they were tied for 8th with Georgetown, or they were either tied for 8th with Georgetown or they were below George. Yeah, Georgetown was 8, Seton Hall was 9. I'm like, no, that's absolutely not right. And Sean, the team, they proved everybody wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that 7, 8, 9 range, that Butler and Seton Hall, I think they're really close to one another in the 7, 8 range. Villanova, I mean, they got Eric Dixon and a bunch of question marks. They didn't have the kind of offseason that they had last year where they got a bunch of big names like Hakeem Hart, um, like Burton, another example. And then there was someone else. He was oh my God, he was a wing. And yeah, see what, like the offseason is rotting my brain.
I think the point you're making is that there were high expect. I think one thing a lot of people do is they fawn over transfers, which, I mean, unfortunately, Seton Hall's in that boat as well. You look at how guys are rated as transfers, and you say, wow, we got, let's say, the 10th best transfer and the 21st best transfer and the 33rd, and you put all these transfers together, but then they don't realize that the transfer has to play well within the system. Like last year, for example, I'll use St. John's as an example because that's the one I probably study the closest. You had Jordan Dingle, who a lot of people thought could have been drafted in the NBA draft in June of 2023, and you had Chris Ledler, a guy people were fawning over, who thought he was a borderline NBA prospect. And what happens when they get to St. John's? Everyone thought in the preseason, wow, we have Dingle and Ledlam and Rick Pitino, and this team's going to the Sweet 16. Dingle and Ledlam underperformed
Yeah.
what everyone was expecting to do, and St. John's didn't even make the NCAA tournament. So, in that sense, you have to take how well you expect transfers to do. You have to put them in the context of where they're going, what role they're playing, and just the fact that what looks a certain way on paper sometimes doesn't translate to how it looks on the court. So, that's something where, a lot of people love the transfers that Xavier got. A lot of people love those transfers Villanova had last season. And, unfortunately, Villanova, couldn't even make it out of the first round of the NIT.
Yeah.
So,
They almost
in
lost
that
to
sense,
DePaul in the Big East tournament. Don't let anyone forget that they almost lost to DePaul in the Big East tournament.
yeah. So, I mean, they sort of just put as well as these transfers get rated as transfers. What works in one system in a mid-major or some other school does not necessarily work when you get into the Big East. So it's really you have to take how well you expect your transfers are going to do and put them in the context of what happens when they face Big East competition day in and day out. The Big East is a different animal than the Mid-American Conference or the Missouri Valley Conference
Ivy League.
or the Mountain West. So in that sense, these players have to prove themselves on one of the toughest conferences in college basketball.
I just remembered who I was thinking of. It was TJ Bamba. That's who it was. And everyone was like drooling over him coming over from Wazoo, and then he goes to Nova. They don't make the tournament, but Wazoo does. I just what was the thing Alanis Morissette once said? Isn't it ironic? But that's none of my business. And speaking of, with Villanova, I know we kind of hinted at it like last episode. The opening to the Big East Conference schedule, that could be a big, big momentum swinger for Seton Hall. To go into the new year, it's not unrealistic or impossible to think that they could go 3-0 to start conference play because they go to Villanova. Granted, it's at the Finn, a place they haven't won at in 30 years now. It's crazy to realize that. They have won at Villanova, prior to that, they won against them 2020 with Miles Powell and that crew at Wells Fargo, but they're going into the Finn this time. They're playing there in front of fans, mind you, for the first time since MLK Day in 2017, which is kind of bonkers to think about. And then they get Georgetown at home on a Sunday at the Rock. And then 9 days later, they come back from, Christmas, the holiday and all that. And they got to go play Xavier on New Year's Eve at 2 p.m, which, like the Villanova game, is a Peacock exclusive. I just want to make that. I just love saying that now. Actually, no, I love it, but I also hate it because I feel bad for anyone that's not subscribed to Peacock already and like, oh, I got to pay money to watch my Pirates player. Anyone in the conference, and anyone who's under that NBC ribbon, I do feel bad for them. Luckily, I have Peacock already, so that's kind of null and void. But I really don't think it's unrealistic to say that 3-0 is not off the table. If they can find a way, hell, even if they can go to the new year 2-1, that's definitely not unrealistic. And I mean, we're forecasting way ahead. But if they're playing well right before conference play starts, which ends at Rutgers, who is in the top 25, just cracking it at number 25. I mean, who's to say that if they come into Big East play, I don't know, if they pull a Butler and they go 9-2, for example, with all this momentum, yeah, 2-1, if they can go into the new year with at least 10 wins, I think you're going to be in really good shape. But how are you feeling about that prospect of opening up with a slate that arguably is more favorable than what we got last year?
I think we talked about this a little bit in the last episode when we looked at how the back end of the schedule was. Playing Connecticut 2 of your last 7 games, having to go to Marquette, having to go to St. John's, getting Creighton at home. So those last 7 games are a juggernaut. So if you're going to accomplish anything this season, you've got to get off the ground running in conference play. Because, you get those 3 games you talk, which is funny, just looking at it. Seton Hall's got 1 game in a 16-day stretch between the 22nd, when they play Georgetown and Newark, and then January 8th, when they play DePaul in Newark. And that only game in that little stretch, which is unusual because the Big East usually has you play a couple of games out in the Midwest. They only make the one trip to Cincinnati, and then they come back when they play Xavier. So that I think that means one of their buys would be that first weekend in January,
Uh-huh.
and then they come back the following Wednesday to play DePaul. So in that sense, you want to make your mark before you get into that stretch starting in the middle of February, where you're facing those teams who are either ranked or on the verge of being ranked through on the back end of your schedule. And that way, you can at least put up, let's say, a 3-4, get some quality wins, and have a nice, resume for the NCAA because you've built it up in the non-conference as well as in the first half or first 2/3 of your conference schedule.
So looking at how, with Evan Maya's rankings and all the advanced analytics and how the AP poll has formed, last year the Big East only had three teams in the NCAA tournament. Everybody and their mother knows, and I don't want to hear anyone denying it, that it should have been at least four, probably five. St. John's had a very good case to make it in, along with Seton Hall. Um, you could have even pushed for a sixth team potentially, but I think five is the fairest number. There should have been five teams in the term, but instead they only sent three. Um, Overall, what do you think in terms of where do you think Seton Hall needs to finish in the conference? And overall record, where should it stack up if we want to get to that tournament, which has eluded Shaw the first couple of years, although really he and his team should have been in last year.
I think it sort of depends on how everything else plays out. You're going to get at least, I don't know, VCU's a nice win. Whether VCU's the type of win that's uh, which is whether VCU looks good or looks really good, which is the first game they're playing in Charleston. We don't know how good that VCU win is. It's a neutral game. It's against VCU. But then you have opportunities throughout the rest of like, for example, if you were to advance past VCU, you conceivably could play Nevada, who was an NCAA team last season. And again, we don't know what Nevada's going to be, but Nevada's a game where you get a win like that, and that's something which could look very good on the resume in March. And then conceivably, you might play Miami, and we don't know we know Miami at times has been a very good resume building win. At other times, like last year, it wouldn't look so good. But you just got to stockpile wins. You can't really think, you can't really play that game of, you want to at least get a couple of nice wins. Like, see, the problem last year was nothing Seton Hall did in the non-conference aided their resume. And that includes Missouri. You might think, all right, you beat an SEC team on the road, and that should look really good on the resume.
They were asked.
Except for the fact that Missouri ended up going, what, 1-17 in the SEC?
No, I think they lost every single conference game, and they had a lead in their SEC tournament game, and they blew it.
Yeah, Missouri just cratered. Missouri was almost as bad as DePaul. So in that sense, you just got to get the win and let everything work itself out. Now, I think that game at Rutgers is definitely going to be a resume building game. I don't think there's any doubt, even though, we cycle back to our discussion of Ken Pom. Ken Pom has Rutgers as the 17th best team in the Big Ten, which on the one hand is absurd. On the other hand, if they come closer to that, then the humans, I think that the general public thinks they're going to be a top 8 team in the Big Ten. But if they're closer to what the analytics say they're going to be, that win may not look as good if you were to pick them off at Jersey Mike's. as you think it does, given that the pollsters think they're the 25th best team in the country. So, who knows? But then you got to get again, you just sort of you want to end up at least with a winning record, if not 12 or 13 wins. And now you might say, all right, Seton Hall got 13 wins, and what good did that do them? But when you consider A, they did nothing of significance in the non-conference, and B, whether this means anything or not, their analytics in conference play were terrible. Blown out at Connecticut, blown out at Marquette, blown out at Creighton, blown out at Villanova. I mean, the blowouts just wrecked their net. They wrecked their Ken Palm. And that's something where, hopefully you don't get as many crushing defeats so that if you put up 20 and 12 again, that those 20 look a little bit better than they did last year. Of course, the selection committee is also about politics. So, unfortunately, there's a human factor in the selection committee that you cannot account for. I guess the good news is that, this year, at least we have some better people like Stu Jackson, for example, the West Coast Conference commissioner, who used to be the assistant Big East commissioner, is on the committee. And I think I forgot who got put in. Was it Lee Reed of Georgetown? I think they replaced Barry College. They replaced Butler AD. I think they put Lee Reed from Georgetown, who at least who at least is going to fight for something because he's not retiring the week after the NCAA selection committee finishes up. So the selection committee looks a little bit better, but you got to have that resume to begin with. You can't walk in, you 8 and 12 is not going to cut it.
Nope.
You gotta rack up some Big East. You got to get over at least 11, 12, 13 Big East wins to be in a position where you have at least an arguable case to make the tournament.
Yeah, I think I really thought going into that Big East tournament that we got a good cushion. Like we've won 13 conference games. Again, I do understand the logic of we got absolutely destroyed on the road several times. Like you listed 4 out of our 7 losses in Big East play, and it was by I want to say the combined margin of defeat was like close to or over 100. Like, because I'm pretty sure I know the game against Villanova was like 28. I think that was the margin of defeat. Like you're already a quarter of the way to 100. So yeah, that's gonna tank you. But I think finishing top 5 in the conference is probably your best bet. Unfortunately, that didn't work out in our favor, even though it should have. I'm accounting for human error, and honestly, I would argue, and a lot of people would, that Collier didn't really advocate as strongly for the Big East as the other people in the room advocating for the rest of the Power Five, which is now the Power Four. But Lee Reed, I've met him on a couple occasions. He's gonna fight for the Big East. Like like you said, not on his way out the door. He's been working his tail off to, build up his programs. I know Ed Cooley didn't have a great time in year 1 on the Hilltop, but he's still building. The rest of his athletic department's good. I mean, the women's team, not to go on a tangent, they're on the way up because they had a special run last season. A special run considering, the head coach they just hired had passed away due to breast cancer. And which is appropriate to bring up because of the fact that October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and then their interim coach leads them all the way to the Big East final, which is a really cool special story. And you got to give credit where credit's due for Lee Reed to make the right call and keep Haney there. So I'm going to wrap my tangent up there, but yeah, Lee Reed is a much better fit to fight for the Big East on that selection committee than Collier was. I don't think that's news at all. It should be common knowledge that Lee Reed would be a much better advocate for the conference. But yeah, I think top 5 finish in the conference. You're going to have to win at least 10 Big East Conference games to get an NIT bid, at least in my mind. Although we saw with the NIT last year with teams opting out, you saw a team like Xavier, who had a losing record, get into the NIT. Butler had a losing record in conference play, but they got an NIT bid, probably off the backs of that really strong non-conference slate that they had, and several good wins, which included one winning in Omaha in February. But yeah, I think bare minimum 10 conference wins. Um, Top five finish probably gets you into the NCAA tournament if you do certain things, if you avoid a bad loss in non-conference play, which the Rutgers loss at home aged like milk. And that also played a bit of a role. It didn't help that, like you said, we beat Missouri in Kansas City, and then Missouri just absolutely tanked and was the worst team in the SEC by a country mile. So yeah, you're going to have to rack up some good non-conference wins in order to build that momentum, especially for that first stretch of games, the first three games in conference play before the calendar turns to 2025. Um, yeah, I mean that's just my general sense. But overall, speaking of, I know that Media Day just happened in South Orange for the Pirates. Shaheen Holloway, from what I read, quietly confident about this group. I feel like I'm getting the same vibe from last year. He was quietly confident in the guys last year, and look what happened. Same thing this year. So I mean, what are your takeaways from the quiet confidence and just the overall rumblings that you've probably been seeing on social media throughout the day today?
I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. These are his guys now. These are guys who have accepted being part of what Shaheen Holloway wants to do. The first season, he had to deal with Kadari Richmond and Tyree Samuel, who were playing under a new head coach. They had been brought in by Kevin Willard. They did things the way Kevin Willard wanted to do things. And then you go to Shaheen Holloway, and even though Holloway is a protege of Willard, Holloway has a much different mindset and a much different way of doing his business than Kevin Willard did. You know, as much as Willard preached playing defense, Holloway tells you straight up, you don't play defense, you don't play for me.
Mm-hmm.
So then and the cycle back to if you look at the defensive ratings at Seton Hall, and I tweeted about this when Evan Meyer's ratings came out. You have three guys at Seton Hall in the top 15 defensive rated players on this roster. Dylan Adewusu, Isaiah Coleman, and I believe it was Scotty Middleton. If memory serves. Let me go to the player ratings just to confirm that. But he recruited guys who were not only good athletes, but guys he knew were going to play defense for him. So a lot of people are like, well, who's going to score in this team? But if you think about it, that's not where Holloway does things a little bit differently than everybody. Everyone has their own little system, but in that sense, Holloway has recruited defense. So and a lot of people make comparisons between Seton Hall and the St. Peter's team. That the St. Peter's teams that did well under Holloway, not only the year they made the Elite Eight, but they did reasonably well the year before that and just struggled in their conference tournament. So in that sense, if you have defense as your baseline, as Holloway has built this team around Garway Duel, Dylan Adewusu, who are good defensive players. Scotty Middleton's an excellent athlete. You look at those guys. You look at the core of a team like that, and even some of the guys you have on the bench on this team, who are sort of defense first guys, who sort of play offense second. I mean, if you remember the movie Coach Carter from 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
when Samuel L. Jackson basically didn't tell them anything about how to play offense until right before their first game. He spent a month of practice. At least the movie portrayed it, but I think it's pretty similar to how it happened in real life. He spent the first month of practice telling them how to play man-to-man defense, telling them how to play zone, telling them how to press. If you're using defense as your baseline, if you're using defense as your foundation for this team, then sometimes if you play defense well enough, whatever you get out of offense is a bonus. So, in that sense, you might say, all right, the Seton Hall doesn't have a guy who jumps off the page as you don't have a Cam Jones on this roster. You don't have an Eric Dixon off this roster. You don't have a Stephen Ashworth on this roster. You don't have a Jaden Epps on this roster. You don't have Seton Hall doesn't have a guy right now you would call the go-to guy. Seton Hall has guys who have that potential to be 12 to 15 a point game scores, but you don't have that one guy. You don't have Miles Powell. You don't have Alamir Dawes. You don't have Sandru Mamukelashvili. You don't have guys who in the past have been like sort of the go-to guy.
Yeah, like
A lot of
Whitehead.
people, Isaiah Whitehead is another example. I mean, one of the jokes this year is that Tim McClune famously announces the last guy as he is.
Mm-hmm.
Miles Powell was he is. Sandru Mamukelashvili was he is. Kadari Richmond was he is. He is this year is Dylan Adewusu, a guy who has never averaged 10 points a game in his 4 seasons playing in the Big East. But he's a guy who, if you don't have a guy like that, is sort of your leader because he's a guy who's all about playing tough, who's all about playing defense, who's all about helping the team out, even if his shooting's off, even if he can't find his way to score. There were games Wusu scored less than 5 points, but he was as important as anybody else to Seton Hall winning games, particularly some of those games last season. So in that sense, if Dylan Adewusu is sort of like the northern light on this team, and you get 7 or 8 guys who are playing with that same mental toughness, who are playing with that same defensive mentality first. While you might not be like excited about how Seton Hall is going to play in terms of their ability to score on the offensive end, you know that teams are not going to want to play Seton Hall because they're going to make things tough on the defensive end. We joke about rock fights. We joke about, on the one hand, how it's ugly to root for a team that's going to have to win rock fights. But on the other hand, like even last season, they won 25 games, even though there were only a handful of games where you looked at it like, wow, Seton Hall was like DePaul, they were awesome. Everyone was awesome against DePaul. But they weren't awesome in a lot of other Big East games. St. John's at the Rock, they were awesome. But other than that, the other 10 games they won in the Big East were basically just grind it out, go down to the last few minutes of the game, and find a way to make a play or two at the end. And that's what you've got to look for. There's a lot of parallels between what this team's going to have to do to be successful and last year's team. But you know that Shaheen Holloway can do it because he's got a track record of doing it at St. Peter's, and he's building a track record of doing it at Seton Hall.
I really think that in a way, Shaw essentially he reverse engineers his roster rather than like, all right, well, technically the objective of basketball, in order to win, you got to have more points. So you got to have more guys that can score the ball and get more points on the board. But you can also win by the other team having fewer points than you. You can make that argument. And what do you do to prevent the other team from scoring more points than you? You play great defense, and he brings in great guys who play defense. And I want to make it. I'm going to raise you another sports movie reference for how he constructs his roster and his mentality. I want to relate it to because I'm rocking this. I'm gonna relate to something baseball, Moneyball, and with losing Kadari and Dre Davis, like, well, we can recreate them in the aggregate, and which they kind of done that with the guys they brought in. They know their roles, and like you don't expect a guy like Scott Hatterberg to go out and hit you 30 to 40 home runs. You don't need a guy like Gus Yalden to get you 15 and 10 a night. You don't need a guy like Prince Aligbe to score like that 13 to 15 range. I feel like 15 is a popular number for me to say today. And you don't need guys like Yassine Toomey to rebound like Angel Delgado. You don't need a guy, hell, even a guy like Chauncey Jenkins, who's a bona fide scorer. You don't need him to be putting up 20, plus points a night. You just got to find a way to win, and he has the personnel. They will know how to win. No, in a number of different cases. Like if they need to win a shootout, so be it. But their bread and butter is going to be winning those ugly games where it's rough and tough physical play, and you might have to go to your bench because there's a lot of fouls being called, whether it just be from physical play or because unfortunately James Brady's on the whistle. But I had to make that joke. I mean, this is my one preseason James Breeding joke. I will hold off until the rest of the season because then it'll be more.
I think it's two. I think you dropped one last month.
Damn it! All right.
You're not doing the igloo anymore, so you don't have as many chances to beat up breeding. But
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right.
yeah, you don't have a weekly time to give him a punching bag or think about a game you've watched. But yeah, no, I think it's funny. I think somebody had quoted. I think it was our good friend Adam Zielenka, uh, a friend of the show, who quoted Holloway and said, I've got 7 guys I can bring in to play the guard positions. And I think he's talking about playing 3 guards.
Mhm.
I've got I've got 3 guys I can play at the power forward, and I've got 3 guys who can play at center. So in that sense, he's basically looking at what each part can do on this roster and trying to think about how each of these parts makes his own contribution and how that leads to victory, as opposed to, let's say, last year, to make a comparison where we talked about this back in episodes last October, where you say, all right, Kadari's going to give you 15, 16 points a game. Davis is going to give you 12 to 15 points a game. Dawes is going to give you 12 or 15 points a game. So if those 3 guys are averaging somewhere in the 40 to 45 to 50 range, you need to get 20 more points from the Wusus and the Bediakos and the Everetts. And we thought Jaquan Sanders was going to contribute some points, and he sort of washed out. So, last year we looked at 3 or 4 returning guys who were the big time scorers from the team 2 years ago, put their numbers in. This year it's basically like, all right, I'm gonna this I could get scoring from anybody at any given night. It could be a Middleton night. It could be a Jenkins night. It could be a Zion Harmon night. For all we know, it could be a Garway Duel night. Maybe there's the night that Duel finds his 3-point shot and gives you 20 points. So I think it's a matter of, I've got guys who can do it, and depending on who can do it on any given night, that's the guy that becomes the go-to guy for that game. And the rotations are going to change depending on who you play against. You're going to have to play bigger when you play Creighton. You're going to have to play bigger when you play Connecticut. You might have to play bigger when you play St. John's. But then the reverse of that is that you don't maybe necessarily have to play as big and tough when you're playing a team like Marquette, who's going to start 4 guys, 6'7" or lower, and maybe has one legitimate big man you have to worry about, who doesn't really play like a big man in Ben Gold. You play Villanova, and they're going to start 4 guys who are 6'6" or 6'7" and shorter, between Poplar and Longino and Brickus, and the only big man who's probably going to start. I don't know if this guy Boaki, who is a transfer from Fresno State's, going to start. You know that you're going to see Eric Dixon 30 minutes a game, but you maybe don't have to go as big when you play at Villanova. Xavier's a wild card. We don't know what we're going to have to deal with when you play Xavier, depending on Hughley, Fremantle, and Hunter. So, in that sense, different teams are going to require you to play a different set of players, more minutes than, one night you're going to see more of, Okorafor, because you need to go bigger that night. Then maybe another night you're going to see more of Chauncey Jenkins than you might Okorafor or Tume. So, it's going to be interesting to see that it's sort of something. I think somebody mentioned this, talking about how Holloway's going to be playing chess a lot. He's going to take the pieces on the board and have to move them around depending on what his opponent looks like, as opposed to, here are all my cards, take me on. Here's my starting, like Creighton will. Creighton's going to put their starting 5 out and say, go beat Ashworth and Isaacs and Miller and Kalkbrenner. Go beat those five guys, and then you beat me. Whereas Seton Hall, you don't know where they're going to come from on any given night.
The more I thought about it, I'm really gonna need someone within the Seton Hall, like in our either in the Seton Hall Twitter group chat, or I'm never gonna call it X. Like, I'm sorry, it's just not gonna happen. I refuse to call it that. But someone within that community, I need for someone to Photoshop Shaw's face on either Brad Pitt or Jonah Hill. Like, what does he play defense? Kind of like, but does he get on base? Like that. That's the philosophy. You know like for baseball, like getting on base is extremely important. Playing defense is essentially the equivalent in terms of and for basketball because you don't need to hit 40 home runs and drive in 100 something runs to have a successful baseball season. Like you got to get on base and just manufacture runs. And essentially, you got to play great defense in order to you know manufacture turnovers in this case and get points off those turnovers. Like that's essentially what you're trying to do. And Shaw has that formula. He knows who he is as a coach. He knows who he wants as a coach. He's got his roster. I don't think anyone on this roster is Kevin Willard holdover anymore. These are all his guys, exactly as you pointed out. And I think that's going to help them even more this time around than last year. The more I think about it, the more I'm getting excited and revved up and more confident I am in these guys because these are all Shaw's guys now. We've seen what he's capable of as a head coach at St. Peter's and what he did last year with that group who was picked to finish ninth inexplicably in the poll that was released on Big East Media Day a year ago, and they shattered expectations and brought a trophy back home to South Orange with us being NIT
I
champion.
wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if when we see the media poll in a week and a half, we see the same thing. And then the question becomes, on the one hand, everyone's like, oh, Seton Hall has nobody, they deserve to be not. But then you get to, all right, if you really look into what Seton Hall is, I think at that point you're sort of like, all right, maybe these guys are missing the boat a little bit. The sum is greater than the parts in some cases, and I think that's really what you should be banking on if you're a Seton Hall fan. That it doesn't don't go thinking Middleton's going to be a 20-point score, or Jenkins is going to be a 20-point score, or Tume is going to be a double machine. That's not what you've got to think about. Do they give us enough points, rebounds, and defense to get wins on the board so that on Seton Hall's number on the scoreboard is bigger than the number of the opponent on
Mhm.
the given night that you see a particular game. I think that's the mentality you have. That's the mentality you should always have, but particularly with this group, that's the mentality you've got to think about when the ball tips off in a few weeks.
Amen. And yeah, speaking of Big East Media Day, I'm lucky enough. I'll be at it again. Hopefully, I'll get a lot of time talking to Shaw and whoever the Seton Hall delegates will be. Last year, I know Kadari was there, Al was there, I believe Dre Davis was there too. So I'm interested to see. I would be shocked if they didn't send Dylan Adewusu, who I feel like he's going to be the presumed captain of this squad as one of the few returners. I feel like Isaiah Coleman probably going to show up, but I guess I'll find out the morning of. But yeah, I'll probably do my best to shell out some content or something along those lines, talking to Shaw and his players, and obviously I'll scope around the rest of the league because as a Big East fanatic, I want to talk to the rest of the teams, with coaches, players, etc. So yeah, gonna make the most of it for another year, although it'll be not quite igloo based, but more of a more on a hoist the color side, which should be a lot more fun, exciting, and getting a lot more quality time, if you will, talking to Shaw, and whoever the whatever players that join him at the Garden. So I think we covered a lot here, and the next time we're going to come to you, it'll be opening night. So November 4th, that's when you can expect the next episode of Hoist the Colors to come out. But in the meantime, you see me rocking the NY. As you know, the ALCS starts today. The NLCS started yesterday. I'm honestly rooting for a Subway Series because obviously I want my Yankees to go to the World Series. Sorry, John Fanta. Like it. I get it as a Clevelander, but I gotta show off for the Yankees, and I can't stand the amount of um the media shoving Otani down our throats. I think we need more of the grimace Mets. I know you're a Mets guy, so I mean I want to see the grimace Hawk to a Mets in the World Series. The
Yeah,
city
so I
needs
mean,
it.
it is what it is. What I mean, last night wasn't a good start, but it's a 7 game series. You have to win four. My last pitch is shout out to Onward Setonia for I think it was 2 weeks ago that they started putting out the Gus Bus shirts. And I think that Tim and I are comfortable in saying that our the guy on the team we are rooting for the most is the Wisconsin transfer Gus Yalden. 6'9", but he's got a personality that you don't see on Seton Hall rosters very often. And they put out these neat little shirts. Uh, you can go on Onward Setonia, and for $20, that's a very good price. You can rock these at the Rock in 3 weeks. We can build a movement around it, and the money goes to the NIL. So I think if for a reasonable price, I know that the beefsteak is 200 some odd dollars. They're trying to sell $400 watches. You can go on a boat with the team for $1,000 or whatever. They've got these high end NIL things, but they also have low end NIL things. You can do this, and I think for promoting the Gus Bus, and I'll tag him on this. Maybe you can put it on the Instagram, Tim.
Oh yeah.
Maybe we can entice Gus to show up and try to sell some of his shirts because that's money going in his pocket. That's a couple. If he gets 100 of these shirts sold for $200, he can eat pizza for a week.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
assuming that's enough for Gus, but yeah, the point is, this is where, if you want to do something to help the team out besides, going to the games and besides watching on television or giving your $5 a month to NBC for Peacock, $20, easy, almost everybody should be able to afford these Gus Bus shirts. They come in blue, they come in white. They came within a week and a half, which is almost a miracle for anything Onward Setonia, but they'll come out quickly. You can put your order in now and have a Gus Bus shirt to rock when you show up at the Prudential Center for the opener against St. Peter's in 3 weeks. So maybe as a comment to the site on Twitter or X, we'll leave a link in the description where you can buy your Gus Bus shirt. And maybe if Gus sees this and appreciates it, reach out to Timmy and you can do a 30-minute comedy, 30-minute monologue on Hoist the Colors. We'd love to have Gus just ramble on about baseball, Wisconsin, whatever
Jeez.
crazy stuff he wants to talk about.
Yeah, and by the way, it was a really good design. Like it actually looks like a bus. The basketballs as the wheels. Whoever designed that, give him a raise, stat, and if it's like an independent contractor, get him like retain him and give him as much design leeway and credit as much as you possibly can because that is genius, and I feel like that's not just a one-off stroke of genius. So whoever that is, I tip my cap to you. That is just fantastic work. And I mean, if I don't get it as like a holiday gift, I'll just go get it my damn self. I don't really care. But yeah, I think that's a good way to plug Onward Setonia and our little PSA to like, hey, if you support Onward Setonia, you're going to support our the program, and you're going to support all of Seton Athletics too, because it all matters and it helps our athletics programs and especially basketball continue to grow, especially as the our new practice facility is set to open pretty soon. As Jerry Carino just took a tour of that recently. I would highly recommend checking out that article, as well as we'll put a link out to where you can get those Gus Bus shirts, and I will hype the hell out of them. That much you can count on me for. So until November 4th, for Pat Madden, I'm Tim Best. Onward to Tonya, and we'll see you opening night. Take care, y'all.